Welcome to our latest Downtown Den, and today I'm in conversation with the head honcho of one of the premier businesses, and certainly in the property world, a well-known name, that's Bruntwood, and of course it's Chris Oglesby. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Frank. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. And I was saying, go on, mate. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's not quite the same as when we're fidgeting around on a couple of stools in front of people, but it's the best we can do.
Yeah, and they seem to be working quite well. I mean, there's nothing quite like the face-to-face, is there, in the personal interaction. But nonetheless, it's not a bad substitute. And I was saying to you offline that I've gone to the trouble of putting my Manchester City coloured night top on today in honour of you, because you're a massive Man City supporter. And Joseph Venables has already typed into the chat room to basically criticise your dress sense, Chris. He's saying, "What the bloody hell are you doing wearing a roll neck jumper?"
Yeah, it's pretty chilly inside, actually. So yes, it is warm out, but no, I typically follow the sun around the house during the day, so I'm in different rooms. But no, I'm in a shady room at the moment that hasn't had any sun on it. So yeah, that's why I'm in my roll neck. But otherwise, yes, my plan was a sky blue round neck today, so we would have matched.
Right. Well, listen, Chris, let's get into the conversation. And the great thing about Bruntwood, and the reason why Downtown's been able to develop such a positive relationship with you guys, is that we've sort of followed you around different cities. So we're based in Bruntwood buildings in Liverpool, in Leeds, in Birmingham, and of course, Manchester. So I just really want to do a little bit of a visit to each of those cities to see where you think they are in terms of their progress and development, and more importantly, where Bruntwood are in terms of the projects that they're involved in those places. And let's start with Liverpool, because of course it's not been all bad news through the lockdown. There was a fabulous announcement as far as that city was concerned just a couple of weeks ago, with the big deal that you guys are involved in the Knowledge Quarter there. Tell us about that deal, Chris.
Yeah, that one's been quite a long way, a long time in the coming. After we bought Manchester Science Park, which is now about 9 years ago, we started looking at where there were similar setups in cities that we're operating in, and Liverpool was an obvious one. But as I say, it's taken a while for partners there to get to a place where they really wanted to bring private sector support in to help them drive forward the vision. I think they've done very well recently. Amazingly well in some ways, which I think is down in part to the vision of Colin Sinclair, who's been leading the Knowledge Quarter. The fact that they started the development there with Paddington Village, which arguably was the toughest site because it was the one that was furthest from Lime Street, and actually now what we've got to go at is everything that sits at in between. So no, Scientech I think is hugely exciting. We've got really strong civic leadership in Liverpool now in Tony Reeves, who gives us a lot of confidence, and strong leadership in the three universities, in both Liverpool University and John Moores, but also, and particularly I think relevant now in this world of pandemics, the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, which has such expertise in that area. No, hugely excited with the Scientech deal. Still big believer that there is a great opportunity to continue to develop our works brand in the centre of Liverpool as well. We've seen the dynamics of that market improve immeasurably over the last 5 years, as a lot of the supply has been taken up for alternative uses, which have added to the vibrancy of the city and the footfall in the city as well. No, certainly coming out of COVID and being involved in Scientech, we can really see what are those industries that's going to drive Liverpool forward, and also working with the civic partners in the university and the city. to really ensure that the strategy of the city is focused on the strengths of the city and what makes it distinctive. So, no, positive about Liverpool. I'm not going to say I'm negative about any of the cities, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, why would you? I think they've all got great
No,
things.
I mean, clearly, at macro overall, there is a massive concern that we're heading into a period that reminds me a bit of the 1980s, where we're going to end up with structural unemployment because we've accelerated the coming of the fourth industrial revolution with this whole thing, and we've seen 5 years worth of innovation in 6 months, and so we're going to see jobs disappear forever. But hopefully this time round we're ready to upskill people, and all of the civic conversations I'm having at the moment are that importance of getting the providers in place ready to upskill people for the new jobs, because one thing that we have noticed in all our cities who are creating more jobs than we can fill at the moment, and the challenge that was before COVID, but I think that will still be the case particularly in parts, in industries where digital is disrupting. And so how we get our workforce upskilled to take those new jobs in a digital world is the big challenge. Anyway, let's get back to cities. And where do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think I'll come back to some of those points later in the conversation, obviously, but just sticking with Liverpool for one moment. I think, in the past, the city has often been hit by recessions and by crises such as the ones we're experiencing at the moment, and dreaded the other side of it, because it's often gone into those recessions in the doldrums anyway. So I think a couple of things. Firstly, as you mentioned, Chris, there was already a bit of a buzz about Liverpool on the back of the Capital of Culture in 2008. It started to develop a much better reputation and win some investments and regenerate parts of the city that had been neglected for a long time. But I think the significance of the investment that you guys have made alongside your investment partners, L&G, is it's a massive tick in the box in terms of a vote of confidence. And I think, if you're a Liverpool salesperson, if you like, for the city, so if you're at the city council or if you're at marketing Liverpool, the fact that you can actually go to other investors and say, well, look, the credibility is here because we've just secured this investment. That's massive for a place like Liverpool, Chris.
Yes, and the one thing that L&G and ourselves are absolutely sure about is that we're keen to work with the city to bring in to bring in more investors as well. We see that there are a number of very key sort of synergistic projects that are being talked about across the city region. And whilst there's a degree of overlap and competition there, most of them are actually helping drive value for the other, and therefore working. And we're not going to, we don't have the bandwidth to do everything. We're not trying to do everything. What we want to do is be collaborating with others on really getting that vision for the city right, and ensuring that it's being funded and delivered by credible operators that are really going to be able to deliver it as well.
Okay, so if we move up north a bit to Leeds, and Leeds, I want to talk two things here really. Bruntwood's involvement, because obviously some significant and key developments that you're involved in the city, but also, you and I have had long discussions about our support for devolved powers. And the Northern Powerhouse has been a project that Bruntwood have been very closely associated with. I know you're a keen supporter of. So as I say, two things here, Chris, really, in terms of Leeds. Firstly, the projects that you guys are involved with. Secondly, the news that came through in March and has probably been overshadowed by COVID-19, but it was that devolution deal that West Yorkshire finally managed to get over the line. And I'm sure, like me, you're quite excited at that prospect of being able to deal with a city regional mayor and see those additional resources come into Leeds that they've not been able to get their hands on because of that failure of a combined authority governance model.
Yes, that was a hugely significant thing, and there's a number of, we've been relatively on the periphery, but we have been working through the Northern Powerhouse partnership with Yorkshire on the various different iterations of whatever that devolution deal was going to look like, and the sort of internal politics within the wider county held back, continued to hold it back, but they came up with a pragmatic solution in the end, which is going to be hugely important. I think those places that are going to thrive coming out of this are almost certainly those places which take control of their own destiny. That was always going to be the case without COVID, in my opinion, with Brexit dominating the national government agenda and therefore the resources in national government not being there particularly. So therefore, places needed to come up with their own solutions and then go with the ask, and government, if you can come up with something credible, government are really keen to support. And the levelling up agenda that they talk about I really believe is genuine. I mean, the proof will be in the delivery, but every single minister that you speak to is desperate for credible levelling up projects as well. But there's no question this government at the moment is interested in places where they've got those devolved powers and where they are working effectively with those devolved powers in order to come up with plans. So I think it's hugely significant for Leeds as a city and its broader economic geography. And then, just prior to we felt there was some real progress. We're very close to digital economy in Leeds, having done the tech incubator at a platform, and seeing some really interesting tech that is particularly coming off sort of historic strengths in Leeds. So Leeds was in the day, going back to the days of the building societies, it was a particularly strong financial centre, and it's got good fintech. We had seen, because of the strong NHS presence there, some very strong health tech as well. And the news about Channel 4 coming in that we housed initially at a platform, and then into our building Westgate before they make the move into the Majestic. That will in itself, it's relatively small. It's not a huge operation, but I think what it will do for sort of media in the city will be tremendous. And again, it's just going back to you talking about Bruntwood and LNG and sort of these totemic things that you're able then to point to others. And I think Channel 4 is hugely totemic for Leeds.
Yeah, the hope would be it act as a catalyst for other things, and Leeds has needed, I think, something to focus on in some respects. I mean, I think, the football supporter in me always looks at Premier League football clubs and the benefits that they bring to cities and the economy. And I think Leeds were on the verge of securing promotion. So not because of the Premier League, because I wouldn't mind that being postponed scrap, but for the first division, I'd like to see Leeds coming up. So fingers crossed for them. Let's move up to your hometown then.
Yeah, just before we leave Leeds, just one other thing. I think when we've been looking at it, it's historically its economy has been one that has been very broad, which in many ways is a strength, but almost as the capital city of Yorkshire, rather than necessarily a large city within the UK with specific strengths. And one of the things that we're starting to see the city really start to do is to drill into now what those strengths are. And I think that's the thing that's really going to kick it on, is when it's sort of looking at, right, these are the things that we're actually best in class nationally at, as opposed to necessarily being the city capital for its economic geography, as it's been in the past with a very broad economy. I think the devolution is going to be huge for that. But anyway, then moving on to Manchester.
Manchester, yeah, where you do one or two things in Manchester. And of course, listen, the developments that you've been involved in the past in the city have been hugely impressive, and the relationship that Bruntwood have had with the council and other stakeholders in terms of helping the regeneration of Manchester over a period of 25 years and more now. But equally, the great thing about the city is that it never sleeps. It never rests on its laurels. Sir Richard and Sir Howard were always putting this mantra out there that let's not look backwards, let's look forwards. We've got to look at what we do next. And again, in terms of the next steps in that Manchester journey, Bruntwood have got some very interesting initiatives that they're involved in.
Yes, and who knows who came up with it first, but the Manchester Build Back Better slogan is one that's now being used pretty well globally, and I'm sure we probably pinched it from somebody ourselves. But But as we look at where Manchester was prior to COVID, which was we've regenerated our economy from the sort of the 1980s industrial decline. We've built a service sector. We've generated a degree of wealth, but that wealth hasn't spread itself evenly across the city. And for the city to kick on, we now need to have more inclusive growth for the growth of the city to be sustainable. And so that agenda was already very much at the heart of both the Manchester strategy and the Greater Manchester strategy. And what COVID has done is it's really sort of played that up further. So as we come back, and I think I'm talking about this in a Manchester context, but actually I think all of the cities are thinking this way, that this is going to cost us as a country and as cities a huge amount in lost economic output and lost wealth. And if the one thing that we must do is never waste a good crisis, and this is one which we've got to use to accelerate change. And if we do use it to accelerate change, then we hopefully will be able to sort of not quite forget about that cost, but that it will appear to be something that's palatable. Otherwise, I think we're going to look back at this period and think we were bloody crazy to have inflicted the damage that we have. But if we use it well, then I think it's going to be a real positive. So within a Manchester context, that is ensuring that the work that we've been doing on our clean energy and sustainability and the green economy, that we really use this as a catalyst to push that forward. That a lot of the work that we're doing in health through our devolved health budget and in health innovation, that we drive that forward to ensure that we deal with some of the big health deprivation that we've got, which is holding back our economy so much. That we take advantage of our expertise in things like advanced materials and particularly graphene and push forward that, but also the whole advanced manufacturing sector, which I think we've seen just so badly exposed through the COVID crisis as to how supply chains are so fragile, and so more sort of close to market manufacturing as well, and how we can turn the efficiency that we're going to drive through digital to the benefit of both the people whose jobs it is that we're going to be liberating through digital, as opposed to people like me that own businesses who are just going to get wealthy out of efficiency. And again, for this to be, I'm sort of passionate about the whole productivity piece, which is holding back the country so much. But that productivity has got to be used in a way in which we can deal with wage inequality and everything else, and we can take people who are currently paid minimum or even living wage and turn those jobs into jobs that are properly productive and rewarding for the people that are doing them. So that's sort of the sort of broader macro context. And then in terms of how are we then engaging with the city region and the city in terms of developing that strategy and then evolving and then aligning our strategy in the city to that. And we've got the two legs of the business, Bruntwood SciTech and Bruntwood Works, and actually in Manchester a third leg, which is the health partnership that we've got with the Manchester Foundation Trust, which operates the hospital in central Manchester and north and south. And we've seen the big announcements about the investment in both North Manchester and South. And those are not about building new buildings for hospitals in isolation. It is all about how the medical sector can be used as a wider sort of regen piece for the broader area, and to bring about that big societal change as well. So to reimagine health in society, the health provision in society. And we've got the opportunity to do something really exciting with those two hospital campuses, as well as continuing with the work that we're doing with on the central campus, where the second City Labs building is well underway, and is going to be a major new diagnostic centre. And the third City Labs building got planning recently, and we're in discussions with a number of people for that as well. And then on the tech side, despite the COVID slowdown, in fact, the two big projects we've managed to keep going through COVID are Circle Square and City Labs, working with CISCs and Sir Robert McAlpine, both contractors, have been fantastic in terms of working up risk assessments for COVID at pace in order to keep those jobs going. But the vast majority of the Circle Square customers that we're in active discussions with are still progressing those discussions. So we're confident that we'll be able to push on with the next phase of that. And then the other key project for projects for Bruntwood SciTech are on the Manchester Science Park campus. We've got planning for our next new building there, to follow on from the Bright building base, which again will be focused on tech particularly. And then out at Alderley Park, things are crazy out there at the moment, as you can imagine, having developed the new lighthouse testing facility. We've got the capacity to do 30,000 tests a day there at the moment, and hopefully we'll soon get up to much higher capacity than that. But we've got a number of other businesses. There must be, between the City Labs campus and the Alderley Park campus, there must be 15 different businesses at least all working on COVID at the moment. And then in the works business in the CBD, we've been cracking on with the Pioneer programme, developing buildings, following on from the blueprint that we did at NEO, but then taking that on and evolving it with every new different building. So 111 Piccadilly, Blackfriars House, and Lowry House are the three that have followed on from that. So yeah, lots going on.
An awful lot going on in Manchester. And the final city that I'm going to talk about, and then I want to move into how Bruntwood has evolved as a business over the years, and I guess about to evolve again, because you've got yourselves involved in some interesting shopping centre sites as well. So Chris, Birmingham, which I know is a city that excites you in terms of the work that you're involved in there, and of course HS2. Fingers crossed and everything else, but the government seem committed to that project going ahead. So tell us about Bruntwood's involvement in Birmingham, and of course the great potential and opportunity that's coming that city's way through, amongst other things, the Commonwealth Games, which of course you were involved in Manchester.
Yeah, and so you're absolutely right. We are very excited about the future in Birmingham. Got a great mayor in Andy Street in the West Midlands there, who is somebody that we can definitely work with and shares our vision. We've just got planning permission for our first new building at the Innovation Birmingham campus, the Science Park, that's got a real tech focus to the north of Birmingham. Which, I say to the north, just to the north of the city centre, adjacent to Aston University and Birmingham City University, where we had the launch of the 5G test facility, the virtual launch 2 or 3 weeks ago, and there's some amazing things being done out of that campus. Birmingham, with its sort of historic motor trade expertise, there's work on a lot of work on things like autonomous vehicles, as well as a whole range of things. We've got the sportswear brand Gymshark in there as a tech as part of our tech incubator as well. But we're hoping to bring out the new best part of 100,000 square foot Enterprise Wharf building there, which we've got planning for, and we've got some strong pre-let discussions on that at the moment. And then continuing to explore how we can further build on the Bruntwood SciTech presence with some life science, hopefully in Birmingham as well. And then within the central business district, we're seeing that market performing better than we've seen since we first put up first building in Birmingham in the mid 90s, and leading up to this, we've seen really strong demand, and again a broadening of the economy down there. So yeah, there's 2 or 3 things that we've got half an eye on at the moment to expand the portfolio, because we're full in the city. HS2 to Birmingham will happen. I can see no way that won't happen. I mean, one of the things I think for HS2 particularly, and this stands us in good stead in the north for HS2 North and Northern Powerhouse Rail, which again I am convinced with our new Transport Secretary, he's got the bit between his teeth, and in terms of his KPIs, that is right up there as number one. We're going to have surplus capacity in our construction industry in the UK, and they are recognising that they need these big infrastructure projects in order to keep that construction industry working to capacity. So I'm absolutely convinced we'll not only, I mean, the section to Birmingham, there's no way they can row back on that now, but the northern section absolutely will happen as well.
Great stuff. So Chris, I opened remarks by saying that Bruntwood was a property company. And of course, when it started out, it was very much focused on property and commercial office space. But it's developed into so much more now. You've mentioned the involvement of the business in terms of science and health and tech. And of course, more recently, you've got into shopping centres as well. It's a business that's always managed to evolve and to stay ahead of the game. And of course, in times when you hit a bump in the road, as we are now, I always think there's lessons to learn from bigger businesses, even for SMEs, because it's that ability to be flexible and to adapt and to see new opportunities and how you perhaps need to change your product that has kept Bruntwood ahead of so many of its competitors, and as I say, taking you into new markets. What sort of thinking goes behind those new initiatives, projects that you guys decide, right, we're going to get involved in them? Because there's no way back in the 80s, Michael was thinking about, I might go and buy a shopping centre one day, was there?
Oh, no, he did.
Did he really?
He did. Oh, no, he did. I mean, I was working in London. I was working in London at the time, and I was working as an investment agent. And we digress slightly, but my dad's first ever building was a gas meter factory in Farnworth, which he bought in 1976. It was Bruntwood's first purchase. So as I'm sitting there as an investment agent in Birmingham, and the details for Farnworth shopping centre come across my desk, I think I know somebody that will buy this. So I get on. In fact, my dad historically he used to own some shops in Blackpool and a few other. There was a period when he was desperately trying to find the next thing. When after he'd been doing industrial breakups, when he tried lots of different things before finally settling on offices in the city centre, and then the Bruntwood that everybody knows today was born, and that was when I came back up in the early 90s. But no, we owned, and my first job when I moved back up to work for Bruntwood, he gave me was the management of Farnworth, and we had to re-roof it. And I remember being out sort of 2 o'clock. Every time it rained, I was out at 2 o'clock in the morning putting tarpaulins up and everything to protect the market traders. But no, so I actually, so the answer to your question is not perhaps what you would have expected, which is actually one of the things that we do still is we try and innovate like a small business. So what I do is take myself back to the smaller business that I used to run. When I joined Bruntwood, we employed about 20 people. There's a shot of us all outside Abney Hall. And even when I took over running the business, there were 70 of us, I think, in total at that stage in '99. So when you are nimble, it's continuing to look for where there is that market need. What is it that's not being satisfied, and where is the, when there's disruption in something, that's where there is real opportunity. And so I always balk slightly when people talk about us buying shopping centres, because we had a nightmare I think it was beginning of January. I'd done an interview with the Times in November all about community and everything. And I was expecting this really nice article about how Bruntwood were working with communities to redevelop, and this article came out sort of, right, it was like they had their little bit on the front page as well about it. Oglesby says, buy shopping centres now, which of course will live to haunt me for the rest of my life, because I said, in theory, I said that just before COVID hit. In practice, I never said buy shopping centres. What I did say, and what I do believe still firmly, and I think we did the right thing, because I believe absolutely in Altrincham and Stretford, as I do in Wigan, and as I do in Ashton, and as I do in Bury and all of the other GM towns, that where you've got a progressive local authority that understands what it needs to do, is that there is a real opportunity to take these town centres and to reimagine them as they need to be. It's been quite enlightening going through COVID and seeing that the horrible dysfunctional relationship that there is between big retailers and landlords, and the approach that big retailers therefore take. But actually, working in partnership with people that want to work with us in the places to make those places better places, to build footfall, to work with the local community, what we're going to have to do is reduce the amount of pure retail, because there's less demand for it. It's stating the obvious, and increase the footfall by putting more people working and living there, and then putting more leisure in as well, to come up with a more vibrant centre. But the thing we've got to guard against is reducing the retail down too much, because I actually do believe that physical retail will come back in these places as they become more attractive places to be in. And Altrincham is a lot further down the line, having established itself as being a good place for F&B. Actually, retail footfall has started to tick up. And if we can now reimagine what a fashion cluster would look like in a place like Altrincham, which is very different to what it historically looked like, and we can introduce a bit of things like Afflex, the Afflex concepts and market, some independence, some maker space. We've got the ability that a lot of the space hasn't cost us very much, and therefore we can offer it on very flexible terms. Then you start to create the kind of retail environment that's going to be interesting for people to engage with physical retail again. So, and the same thing applies to Stretford. It's just we're just a little bit further back on the Altrincham experience, and Stretford's very different. Altringham's a market town for a far bigger area, whereas Stretford is very much a sort of a village for the local population around it, and so we're going through a very deep engagement process with the local community on what we're going to do there. So no, what we've been working in our GM towns for I think historically the company's been there right from the very beginning, but in terms of our offices, we've been working in the GM towns since the late 90s. And we've seen them come, when I moved back up to Manchester in 91, rents were higher in South Manchester than they were in the city centre. They've then gone right down, which we saw as presenting an opportunity then where spaces offer lower rent to provide something as a different alternative. And as I say, recreate these local communities, which we knackered so much with some crap out of town development in the 1980s, whether that was offices or retail. So we're very positive, and strong cities need really strong towns around them that provide a different living and sort of leisure experience to a city experience as well.
And in terms, Chris, of the challenges when you sat down, I'm sure, to look at your plans for 2020 and the next 3 years, you probably saw that finding the solutions to those problems in towns as being the significant thing that you may have to overcome. I doubt whether you've been looking at cities like Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, Leeds, thinking, well, we're going to have to really reconfigure how we operate in the cities, because, of course, pre-COVID, each of those places, they had momentum, they all had plans in place, and, of course, we hope most of those, if not all, will be delivered. But nonetheless, we do have to start to rethink how we operate, don't we? And how we start to get the economy back up and running, how we give confidence back to the workforce and to consumers to start utilising cities once again.
Yes, and I'm again think that there's no point in fighting it. We've got to embrace it. One of the things we did to keep our construction sites going was to sit down with the contractors and say, right, we believe we can operate safely. We are one of the most heavily regulated industries in terms of health and safety. So if any industry can come up with safe practices, it should be us. And we came up with safe practices that allowed people to work within 2 meters of each other, which meant that we could keep the jobs going. And what we need, I think we need to take a level of that spirit into the recovery. We've got to recognise that the only way we're going to recover is by creating a safe environment, and we've got to absolutely prioritise that. And there's nothing launched formally yet, but as and when GM launches its strategy, it will be leading with a safety first message. And the way in which we're going to do that is in sort of true collaborative style, and we'll encourage all of the cities to be thinking this way. You need to have business working with civic leaders, working with the transport executives, working with the unions, in order that we're able to come up with a solution that knits itself together. Because when you start to think about how you get people back to work, it starts from them at home. So we need to be thinking joined up about things like childcare. We need to be thinking then about how they're going to get to work. When they arrive at work, if it's a multi-let building like one of ours, then you've got to think about the landlord and how they're dealing with the common parts, and then you finally get to the space that somebody occupies. And the idea that agile working, which a lot of us were already starting to adopt, we need to be thinking about that not only we need to be thinking about that basically through a COVID lens, in the fact that if everybody starts work at between 8:30 and 9, as we see, all of our lift traffic at the moment, then we're not going to be able to get everybody into work, and we're not going to be able to get everybody into buildings. And so we need to be working collaboratively on how do we start to change the working day so that you've got people starting at different times, work on density levels in the short term, so that we don't have the same levels of density. But to build that confidence back in everybody in the population, having scared the life out of them to try to get them to lockdown, we've got and that responsibility to recreate that confidence is something that we've all got to take and see us, each of us, doing our incremental little bit as contributing to it, rather than just expecting central government to change the narrative and stay alert suddenly makes people feel more comfortable, because it ain't going to cut it.
Do you think, though, Chris, just sticking on that point in terms of government narrative at the moment, I mean, I've been very impressed with the way in which the government's handled the economic challenge that it's faced. And, I think the business support packages that Rishi Sunak has put in place have been hugely impressive. But I'm less impressed by the inconsistency of messaging coming out around health. And I somewhat perhaps naively expected Sunday's announcement from the Prime Minister to be a little bolder. I thought that we'd see a turning of the dial more towards that mindset of we're now on a journey back into work. It didn't quite come across as that to me. And I just wonder, Chris, where we sit on this now as business leaders such as yourself, because of course we're concerned about protecting people's health, and particularly the most vulnerable from the COVID crisis. But if we stay into lockdown for too much longer, then there isn't going to be an economy to come back to, and therefore the services that we rely on at the moment, care, health, and all those other things, we're not going to be able to support. So at some point, I think we do need to move the debate on.
We do, but in order to do that, we've got to recognise that we have got to be able to get across the fact that that we're taking measures that are going to make people safe. So we've got to bite that bullet. You and I were talking just before we started this call about things like lifts. So, in typically your average lift, if you were to employ 2 meter distancing, then you're one person in a lift. And if you're one person in a lift, then you're off, anything above the 4th floor or whatever, and you're knackered. So, but actually, you don't have to be 2 meters apart if people are facing in opposite directions, and therefore you demark your lift, you put somebody on, you get people to work at more flexibly in terms of their hours, and you can get more people in. And there's the if we accept the rules have been drawn up as the rules have been drawn up, but the health and safety executive are very clear that where you can't keep 2 meters distance, then come up with method statements that allow you to work around that. And so the really important thing is that everybody is prioritizing the way in which they're assessing risk in order to be able to get around the challenges. And that those of us that can work from home, yes, the advice is if you can work from home. But I think it is also important that we do show leadership and that we do get out, because there is a fairly ugly sort of subtext here, which is that the wealthy are all working from home in their houses with gardens, and they're going to send all of the low-paid workers in at high risk to do the jobs in manufacturing, security, and all of those other things that need to be done. And that's, if that is the case, then those people who are going back are going to feel very reluctant to be the only ones going back. So it is. I think it is really important that we're seen to be leading as well. And from a personal point of view, if they do introduce the 14-day quarantine, whilst it'd be very easy for me to 14-day quarantine after a nice holiday in the sun this summer, I'm not going to do it. If the people that are working on the front line in my business can't take a holiday in the sun because I can't afford for them to take 14 days quarantine.
Yeah, some good points, Chris. I just wanted to pick up on something you said earlier as well. And, it's a long-used expression, but somebody did once say, never waste a good crisis, because there are always some opportunities and potentials for people moving forward. So in that respect, Chris, as I've said earlier, Bruntwood are one of those businesses that have proved to be flexible, nimble. The size of Bruntwood has never stopped you from innovating. But as you look at the broader economy now, you mentioned a couple of things in your earlier remarks, but let's just expand upon where you see challenges, but equally, as I say, some opportunities moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, so I mentioned health, and I see, stating the bloody obvious, but that certainly there are huge opportunities in health. I mean, one of the areas we're particularly strong at in the Northwest is antimicrobial research, and so if you think about antibiotic resistance, that should have been high on the agenda, but we were struggling post George Osborne. George Osborne announced 50 million of funding for a new AMR centre in Alderley, and then Theresa May pulled it immediately. I think getting investment into AMR in the Northwest, where Liverpool, Manchester and Alderley, we've got real strength. But there are health opportunities, health data in Leeds. There's health strengths in each of the cities, and I think that's one of the big areas. I mentioned earlier about manufacturing as well. And I do think more local manufacturing is something that all of the city regions need to prioritise. It's the less sexy part of regen. But the jobs that we're creating in manufacturing nowadays are good quality jobs for local people. So huge opportunities still in digital as well, and then the clean economy, where I think our sector particularly has got to take a real lead. And just on that. I think our cities really need to be very bold as well. I know all of the cities are thinking about how they do that. Birmingham, I know particularly about Birmingham and Manchester. I don't quite have the detail in terms of what Liverpool and Leeds is thinking is, but how far do we follow the example of somewhere like Milan in terms of significantly reducing cars in cities and making them more pedestrian and bike friendly, making them better quality places to live. I think, again, COVID has shone a light on some of the challenges about city living. I'm very lucky not to be living in an apartment at the moment, but making our cities more better quality places for the residents. I think making them greener, making them cleaner and safer is going to be really important. So doing something really radical in terms of our approach to the cars in our cities is a big thing as well.
Chris, thanks for that. I'm going to go to our audience because there's a few questions in the chat box, and I've had a couple emailed to me as well. And I'll start with someone who's well known to you and I, big personality in the Manchester business community, Lisa Morton, who's the chief executive of PR agency Rowland Dransfield. And her question, Chris, is what have you learned about yourself as a leader during the pandemic? Great question.
Yes, thanks, Lisa. And I hope things are going well for you in London. It was, with hindsight, a brave time to be opening up down there. But I'm sure it's going to come good for you, even if it might be a little bit uncomfortable at the moment. So I think, what it has just continued, what a crisis does is it just reinforces those things that you already know, but you have the crisis forces you to become more conscious about your leadership, and so for me, the most important thing is to be completely authentic. People need to feel that they've got that they can trust. They can trust leadership through the period. Communication is absolutely critical, and we've had daily communication going out to all colleagues every day since the COVID crisis started, and we've done videos. And every week I do a coffee morning for a selection of 30 people who can choose to come along and have a Zoom with me to talk about anything in the business. I'll answer any question on anything, but just communicating as much as you can, but also realizing, I think this was where Boris cocked up on Sunday, was when everybody was expecting him to give substance and he didn't give substance. And don't give people the impression you're going to give substance when you're not going to give substance. And what we try to do is, if you're going to try and do something that's a bit statesperson-like, that you ensure that following up from that, that right at the same time there's the detail that backs it up. Otherwise, people get that initial injection of feeling good, but then they're left wanting, as I think that we were all left wanting, until actually a lot of the stuff that's come out has been very good. It's just a bit ambiguous, that's all we found, in terms of what's guidance and what do you have to do. But in that ambiguity provides the opportunity for you to work with the HSE, as I said earlier, to come up with solutions. Anyway, back to leadership. I think, yes, it is all about being as transparent as you can, but managing expectations, being honest with people when there are things that you don't know the answers to. As well, but the fact that what you're doing in order to work through those answers as well. But what we have found through this is that our colleague engagement has gone through the roof again, and the thing that they're most valuing is the quality of the communication that they're getting from us. So a good crisis does tend to allow people to sort of put a lot of the gripes that they might have had to the back of their minds. And it is a great opportunity to pull people together, but only as I say, if you're leading authentically.
Thanks, Chris. I've got a question that was emailed to me earlier from Andy Grant. For those who have not seen it yet, I did an interview with Andy last week, and if you're looking for a bit of inspiration, I would highly recommend it. Not from me, I hasten to add, but from Andy. And Andy's question, Chris: Bruntwood are renowned for their customer service levels, and this hasn't altered throughout this period of time. And I have to say, as a Bruntwood customer, we've been delighted with our engagement as well. How do you and the senior management team keep your staff motivated, not just in this time of crisis, but ordinarily? What are the sort of things that Bruntwood have done in terms of staff engagement, Chris? Because I know you're a keen believer of that strong relationship between senior management and the whole of the Bruntwood family.
Yeah, if I start off more broadly, our sort of Bruntwood colleague proposition is that we say, come to Bruntwood and shape your world. And what we're looking to do is create an environment where we provide the freedom for people working for us to, as the saying goes, to shape their world. And in doing that, I'm a big fan of a sort of motivation guru in America called Dan Pink, who talks about the three things that motivate people as being autonomy, mastery, and a sense of purpose. So creating an environment where people have a degree of, a strong degree of control over what it is that they're doing. Mastery is learning new things all the time, and we're constantly, both through the jobs that people are doing, pushing them to discover new things and do new things, but also through training programs. And we give people funding to do training for things that are completely outside of what they do at work as well. So we have people doing courses in baking or sewing or Spanish or whatever it is they want to do, so they get that feeling of moving forward, that sort of whole Darwinian thing of us evolving. And then that third thing is that sense of purpose and really driving forward. Bruntwood's purpose is to create thriving cities, and for people to connect to the fact that when they're getting out of bed every morning and going to work, they are working to help their cities thrive, so that when their head hits the pillow at the end of the night, they can sleep sort of, feeling content that they've spent their day doing something that has really contributed. So say focusing on those three things, and then practically, you can't overstate the importance of bringing people together. And we have sort of groups of people from all over the business where that come together regularly, both to talk about the business and what we're doing and reconnect with that purpose, etc., but also to have fun together. And we like to do that, and that's done in a way that everybody in the business is socializing together. And we have a really diverse group of people, as you can imagine, in the business, from our plumbers and decorators through to building receptionists and accounts people and everything else. And when you get 600 of us together at Gorilla with a good band at Christmas, sweating together, then that all helps as well.
And just the other part to Andy's question, Chris, was about customer engagement. And again, I know, the Bruntwood Collective, we are very engaged with that in terms of an online platform. But I guess during this period in particular, it's been quite a difficult thing to be able to engage with customers.
Well, funny enough, it hasn't, because everybody's wanted to engage, because there's one thing they wanted to engage about, which is having discussions about the sort of financial difficulties that they've got and how we can work together on those. So actually, it's been a real opportunity to deepen engagement with our customers, and I hope the vast majority of them have felt hugely supportive. There's the odd very unreasonable one. Typically, the unreasonable ones have been the ones who are the strongest. So we've got a couple of retailers who shall remain nameless who are trading through this period. I've got one multinational retailer who don't pay tax in the UK and are American-based, who serve coffee, who were suggesting that perhaps they shouldn't pay us any rent. Whereas actually the vast majority of people have been very reasonable. Actually, a few PE-backed ones have been very difficult as well. Although interestingly, the PE-backed companies have had a challenge because the government aren't doing C-bills for PE companies, so have some sympathy there. But there are also some fairly aggressive PE houses that are just telling the management don't pay because you don't have to, and you will get enhanced returns as a result. Right. But no, the vast majority of customers, this has been a great opportunity to really get to understand their businesses, to understand trading, and to sit down and talk about the relationship long term through this. So, and again, that goes back to the best way of deepening engagement with anybody is all about good quality communication, and wiring yourself for the win-win, as we do as a business. There's always that opportunity to look at things through that lens.
Cool. Chris, last question from our audience today, and it's a fairly lengthy one from Noel Street, who's a director at 3D Reed Architects. Forgive me for not reading the whole question.
I'll just read. I've been trying to read it actually on and off as we've been talking. So I get.
You get the gist of it, yeah?
I do, yes. And again, it's coming back to this idea of whilst there is this big centre, that you've then got all of these smaller, or the polycentric model, as the question says, of places where you've got more and more people walking and cycling and using the lower density public transport, which there are a few legs of the Metrolink which are pretty dead at the moment because they're not the most efficient way of getting into the city centre, but could be utilised very more effectively to connect these other smaller centres with these medium-sized centres. So I absolutely believe in that, and that as the question says, the redevelopment and repurposing of the stressed and de-stressed shopping centres in doing so. I think the idea of the shopping centre should be dead, the old-fashioned shopping centre, and these should be community centres now, where people are shopping, but they're also living and working, and where you've got leisure, as well, and in many cases taking the roofs off them again. And I'm not prejudging the outcome of the Stretford discussions at the moment, but I think in all likelihood, that we will be recreating the old high street again, which was destroyed by the creation of this great big shopping centre. And I think a lot of the great big shopping centres that we've created actually don't provide the environment that is right in these town centres as well. So. But that is a personal view, because I prefer to be outdoors rather than cooped up inside. I spend all my week cooped up inside in an office, and the last thing I want to do is go and spend my weekends. Whereas I'm very happy strolling around, a vibrant town centre with cafes and interesting looking shops to poke into and out of, because that's not shopping, is it?
No.
Anyway, so yeah, the redeveloping and repurposing of those stressed and de-stressed shopping centres, I absolutely think is going to be a huge opportunity for our sector, working collaboratively with local authorities and stakeholders and other stakeholders in towns as well. And I desperately hope that we're going to see some really holistic retailers emerge who are operating in multiple towns, but are working then in those towns as to how to make those towns successful. Because if they want turnover rents, and I'm very happy to work with retailers on turnover rents, I'm going to want them shoulder to shoulder with us on driving turnover as well. And that's more than just by what they sell in their shop. It's by getting out of their shop and encouraging people into the place as well.
Great answer again, Chris. Thank you. And I'm not going to read out Joseph Venable's questions. He can go to you on a coffee mornings and ask you that question himself.
Well, I think I've pretty well answered it anyway, which is yes. This is an opportunity of the scale of the IRA bomb in terms of rethinking about the city, and we must grasp it in Manchester, but not just in Manchester, in all of the cities.
Cool. Alan Robson from Project 4 has said, this is the best Zoom background I've seen all lockdown, so let's go through the key holes. So we'll set that one up, Chris.
Very good, yeah.
A final question from me, actually, is that, I mentioned earlier very briefly that Bruntwood were engaged, very involved, actually, in the Commonwealth Games in Manchester, and we saw the huge lift that gave to the city. We've got the similar opportunity, of course, coming in Birmingham. And I know I've asked you this before at a previous event we did in the city in Birmingham, the Midlands, but just try and reflect, Chris, on your time of that involvement and what you think Birmingham can potentially take as a legacy from those Commonwealth Games in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing is looking at the games. And yes, you've got to make it a success, but you've got to look at every piece of investment that's being made. And instead of looking at it as a piece of investment to deliver the games, is to look at it, what is it going to be able to drive value for over the long term? And that, I think, was the lessons that I don't think Manchester was the first place to do it, but certainly it did it through the Commonwealth Games, and there were a couple of successful Olympic cities that did the same, that really focused on using the multi-sport event to drive that value long term. The biggest single thing I regret from the Manchester one was the fact that we didn't capture all of the volunteers, because it was the days before databases and things. And so all of the people that got engaged and had that civic pride then all disappeared. And so this time round, it's getting a database of local people who are really engaged in their city, and then using those people as sort of positive advocates for the city and engaging with them. Because I think it's one of the things that all of our places aren't as good at as they can be. But it's interesting, this crisis is doing it. So when Andy Burnham said, well, we're not getting PPE from government, so we need to sort it out, he got Tim Nunes at Midas and a couple of others to get out to the business community, and within a week the business community had gotten more than enough PPE for GM. And that's because the world is full of everybody, a vast majority of people want to help. And what we've got to do is to find a way of helping those people that want to help link in with the people that need the help. So the Commonwealth Games will provide it'll be a huge focus to pull the people of Birmingham together. And having done that, they need to capture that, whether that be the business that's getting engaged in the future of the city and keep those businesses engaged, or whether that be the individual residents and the people that get engaged as well. And that, for me, is the biggest single legacy, because I still believe the biggest single reason that our business has been successful has been the fact that we've been operating initially in Manchester and now in the other cities within a culture of collaboration. And that culture of collaboration has driven value. And Bruce Katz talked about innovation districts. He said proximity, density, and a culture of collaboration. And it's that bit where we're making 1 and 1 equal 3 all over the city that is the thing that really drives value. And that, that's what downtown's wired to oil, really, isn't it? And just on that subject, Gary Scott has asked, is the community app still active? And the answer is, Gary, yes, it is, but it's not as active as it should be. And I think if we hold our hands up, we launched it as a B2C app. In other words, it was to communicate with the people in our buildings rather than the businesses per se in the buildings. And I think where we're working hard now is to make it a B2B app as well as a B2C app, so that we can push through good quality community content, both directly to all of the people in the buildings, but also through office managers, etc., to ensure that we get the penetration. But if there's anything more that you would like to understand about that, then please drop me a note and I'll pass you on to the relevant people in the business. But thanks for the question, and thanks for your interest in it. It's going to be a really important part of our business, but also for our customer proposition in the future.
Chris, fantastic to speak to you as always. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Frank. You always give me a bit of a lift. It's always a positive discussion.
And we will do that through the keyhole. I love that idea. We're going to get round with the camera crew any day now. For our colleagues from Birmingham, you may want to just leave this screen and jump over to our next event, which is happening imminently with the Regional Mayor for Birmingham, Andy Street. Our chair, Paul Cadman, is in place now, waiting for Andy to join him. So if you're quick, you can go from Manchester to Birmingham in the blink of an eye. It's not all negative, this COVID-19 stuff. But listen,
I'm sure Andy won't be negative either.
He'd be very upbeat, as most people, in fact, as everyone who's coming on to our podcasts have been. It's been great to see you today, mate. I really appreciate your time.
Always, yeah.
And I hope to see you again very soon in the flesh.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Chris. See you soon.
Bye.